Every 18 months, the lunar nodes will shift into a new set of signs and a new axis. And what it does is it kicks off a cycle. It triggers in a cycle, a conversation about a larger cycle, an 18-year cycle, a 9-year cycle, when the nodes have been in these same signs before. And so we get the fated changes, which are eclipses and which are the lunar nodes, in new sectors. So get ready, because we're going to talk about in this video the lunar nodes in Aries Libra, North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra, all that it may contain, or as much as I can fit in here. Stay tuned. Lunar nodes changing signs, Aries, Libra coming right up. All right. Welcome to my favorite topic. I'm a nodal astrologer. I've become kind of a nodal astrologer. I studied Hellenistic astrology. I came out of maybe a more strict Hellenistic training. But pretty soon, as I started reading charts and working with people, you see almost immediately the power of the lunar nodes, or at least I did. And now they become central in terms of how I like to map the changes in reality, both on the mundane level and on the personal level. The big thing with the mundane stuff is that I was waiting. I had done some mundane cycle work in 2019, 2018, and I'd seen North Node in Cancer, South Node in Capricorn. Every 18 years when that returns, the major events that happen, particularly in the American political scene, you had the end of World War II, the dropping of the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which we have that Oppenheimer picture coming out that we're going to harken back to that. Now, just as the nodes are entering cardinal signs like Capricorn and Cancer, but it's the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then it was the assassination of John F. Kennedy, then it was in the 80s, I think the AIDS crisis emerges around that same nodal event. And then finally 9/11 in 2001, and then we got the COVID crisis. So that showed me just that alone, I was like, wow, this is triggering crisis mundane events that are the most major mundane events that you can have. And so I knew to always pay attention to the nodes at multiple levels. So that's what we're going to do in the video. I want to walk through what I think the symbolic activations are, and talk at length here somewhat about what these new lunar nodes may be doing. First things first, dates are important to map the cycle. Let's jump right in. This cycle opened in April 2023 because the first eclipse in the new axis was that day. And this is how I time nodal cycles, is when are the eclipses hitting in the axis, and then when do the nodes go into the axis and out of the axis. The true nodes are what I map, but the mean nodes can be part of this process too. They have already entered. I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, I saw some people on Twitter saying, hey, the mean north node just entered Aries. And so there's a few levels. It's like getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the cycle. But by this time, because the first eclipse happened on 20 April, that solar eclipse in Aries, now here on 17 July at 8 p.m. UTC, I have here 21:59:36 Central European Time on this chart, but it's at 8 p.m. UTC. The nodes will make this shift. And so by July and then into August, we're now fully into the cycle. We've had the first eclipse in the axis. The nodes are now in the new axis, both the true and mean nodes. And then actually you might time it to this first eclipse in Libra, 14 October. This October, we'll have that first eclipse in Libra, a solar eclipse, visible across America, North America. So you'll see fully then, there's a new eclipse in both of the signs, and the true and mean nodes are now in the axis. By this time, we are now here operative fully. When does the cycle end? The cycle ends 29 March 2025, the last eclipse in the axis. It's a solar eclipse in Aries. The nodes will have shifted into Virgo Pisces by then. So basically keep that in mind. We're talking about April 2023 to March 2025. This is the time map of when these fated changes are going to impact the world and your life as we go deeper now into what these nodes and this eclipse cycle may be about, or what it may be bringing. And you can always go back. I'm not going to do a ton of this work in this video, but it's just key background work. What are the lunar nodes in astrology? And I've got 2 videos on my channel. Part 1 and Part 2. The first one is what do they signify? The second one is chart examples. And I go into a lot of literature references and I really try to break it down deeply. Watch those if you haven't. to get that background. But I'm going to summarize it here. The lunar nodes show the hand of God, where it activates sectors of our charts and accelerates fate. And that's all I mean by hand of God, and I put it in quotes. It's the idea of these kind of bigger energies that operate in our reality. You might call it fate, you might call it destiny, you might call it synchronicity, or the deep kind of unseen forces. It's how they operate. They go through the nodes. It's one of the most important places that I've found these energies to come into the reality. And it can be destabilizing, especially because sometimes we're not prepared for the impact of what the gods or God or these spiritual forces, what they want to show us. Sometimes we're not prepared. And that's why I always tell people the best way to prepare, and I think I'll probably talk about this here, is to just start scenario planning in the new sector around the houses as a starting place. Wherever these nodes come into those house topics, do scenario planning. We have to be adaptable and open-minded and willing to learn, because that will help us prepare and lessen the destabilization if we've already pre-planned a lot of it. And then the final sentence here, the North Node brings appetites. So we sometimes think that the North Node is where we want to express desire, and it's the godlike nature of that desire, right? We want to know something, we want a relationship, and then we come into these desires, merge with God, and then it changes our world. The South Node can be asceticism. It's where we maybe get disillusioned with the material world and then want to turn inward. And then maybe it's more spiritual or ascetic learning. Though I don't delineate these as the primary thing. I like to just think about eclipses in the house topics, and that's where the change can come. I've seen South Node eclipses bring beautiful newness in someone's life. I've seen North Node eclipses take things away in that sector. So it's not quite this brings something, this deletes something with the North and South Node. It's more complicated than that. I think about it more simply as fate arriving and accelerating and emerging. We are being shown what we need to do here in this reality with the nodes and where they are located in the chart. And of course, when you start something, you automatically delete something. So beginnings and endings aren't quite as easy to disambiguate often. Okay, next, the short-term story. All of Venus's signs of dominion, or the signs that Venus has dominion over, which is my favorite phrase that I've kind of come to craft as a way to think about rulership. Planets have dominion over signs, many signs, but Venus has dominion over Taurus, Libra, and Pisces mainly, right? Domicile rulership is Taurus and Libra, and then exaltation rulership Pisces for Venus. All of those signs have major players in them right now. Jupiter is in Taurus, the South Node is in Libra now as it ingresses here on the 17th, and then Saturn is in Pisces. And so the Venus retrograde, this is a short-term story, is impacting all of these major sectors in our charts. And we need to prepare for some major RE word things, rework, revisit, renew. It's not only just Venus and Leo in that sector, but it's all of the other sectors, signs / houses that Venus rules in the chart, where you have Jupiter and where you have Saturn and where you have the South Node. So that Venus retrograde gets exported to signs, and the planets that are in those signs then export those stories into the signs they rule. And so this reverberation effect of Venus retrograde, because of rulership, it's going to implicate so much of our lives. This is kind of a totalizing moment. If you go by Trigon rulership, Venus rules all night sect signs, or so-called negative polarity, as Robert Hand talks about them. All of those signs are ruled by Venus. So Cancer, and in this chart, you've got the Sun and Moon, new moon in Cancer. You've got Mars in Virgo, that's ruled by Venus by triplicity. You have Pluto in Capricorn, all the outer planets, Neptune in Pisces, Uranus in Taurus. So everything almost is ruled by this Venus retrograde. So this is just kind of an interlude here in the video, but it's important to talk about because the South Node is now ruled by Venus. And so the eclipse story is brought into the Venus retrograde in this really short term. So just get ready for July and August and the rebirth and death of Venus. I would take it very seriously, and if you can, turn inward and rest. If you can. I mean, and I always say that. People are like, astrologers tell us to do nothing during a retrograde. Yes, if you can. Try to go inward and rest, and it's perfect because a lot of the world, August is a vacation time. If you can't, it's always good to just be aware, hey, this is an out of control, nodal, fated summer, second half of summer with the whole life in question. Just know this is why. because Venus retrograde impacts everything. And it's like a domino effect on almost every sector of the chart because of rulership. So next, let's talk about Venus and Mars. Ruling eclipses still, because by domicile, when you have the North Node in Taurus, South Node in Scorpio, those are the night domiciles of Mars and Venus. And now when the nodes come into Aries Libra, it's still Mars and Venus by domicile. So we're not escaping the Mars-Venus dance. That's not being escaped. And it's good to think about it in that way, that it's a shift where wherever Mars and Venus are in your nativity, for example, those are the rulers of the eclipse story for you. It's still Mars and Venus. So there's continuity. How will it shift though? How do the nodes changing signs shift? Well, you can look at the nature of the sign itself. What is Aries? So you go from Taurus into Aries, and you go from Scorpio into Libra. Aries is Mars. Okay, so we already covered that, but it's fire. Now we have the fire element, whereas before it was water, earth, now we get fire, air. What is fire? It's the passions of the outer world. It's going in on adventures. It's asserting the will into the reality. It's saying, I want to do this and making it happen. It's our passionate, driving forces of life, and it's very daytime oriented. That's a major difference. You trade in the sun from Taurus had the exaltation of the moon, so you go from moon to sun. Moon is body, home. Sun is fire, outer consciousness, passion, spirit. So it's active now with the sun playing a role. It's the soul of life, right? The outer world life, the nature of consciousness itself. This is how the relational dynamics that the eclipses have affected up until now shift into the style of relational dynamics that's more pure fire passion. You may be thinking now, instead of past issues or more of the inner traumas that Scorpio can be about, or more of the kind of nestlement and comfort side of relational, more internalized. Now as the nodes shift, we're powering out here to say, okay, now I know what I want. I had the Scorpio eclipses, it clarified my deep desires. And now I'm in the outer world shining my light of solar consciousness to find that partner, or to realize I don't want a partner. I want to go out on my own. Like Aries can often be so much about maverickism and cutting away. But it's these kind of getting into the reality with the new vision and implementing it. That's what the daytime would be here. What is Libra? Libra is Venus, so we retain Venus, but it's air, so it's the intellectual side of Venus. It's the communicative side of relationships. The exaltation ruler of Libra is Saturn, which is the deep structure and the rule set and the boundaries and the borders and how we make agreements. Saturn rules sorrow, great power, deep structure. This is legal stuff, right? This is the side of a relationship where you make an agreement and you say, I want this to be a certain way, sign on the dotted line. And so as the nodes come now into Aries Libra, it's more like, how are we going to make it happen in the material world? How will my passions be honored and be forged in the outer world? And then what are the agreements that need to be made around those new adventures with the people in our lives or in my life? And that is where the eclipses now come to change and reverse and invert. So you may discover whole new parts of your relational self as it relates to the implementation and activity phase with this eclipse cycle, though we're still in a Mars-Libra relational kind of moment here. And in your chart, you have something completely different with the house topics. But for this reading, it's impossible to do for everyone. So I'm focusing more on energies that apply no matter the house topic, because these energies of relational action get overlaid. And so you can compare the outer planet, Sun, Saturn component, compare that to the night sect rulers of Scorpio, Taurus, Moon, Mars, Venus, and it's a whole different side. By just sect, you get a whole different focus of this eclipse cycle into these energies. Let's go to horoscope symbols. Let's go to Dr. Robert Hand, one of the best writers, one of the best astrologers still alive. My number one astrologer, if I was building like a draft board, I'd put him. He'd be like maybe my first pick. Stephen Force might be up there. These guys are like the highest level for me of reverence. What does he say in horoscope symbols? He says that the signs are divided into an alternation between positive and negative, or in Ptolemy, masculine and feminine. So you have positive signs and negative polarity signs. Aries is a positive sign. And he says here, the positive signs are usually more objectively oriented and more outgoing, assertive, and interested in what is going on around them. So just what I said, it's outer world focused, it's objective, that's the air energy. And then it is assertive, that's the fire energy. And then it's the outward, outgoing, like he says. The negative signs are more likely to be inwardly directed and concerned with the subjective experience. So I just wanted to bring some text here to support the claims I was just making, just so, I'm not out to lunch. I mean, this is part of our tradition, how we think about signs as polarity, fire, air, earth, water. And you might think about the eclipse cycle as it now comes into a new polarity. It's more outgoing, assertive, and interested in what's going on around you, with the two relational planets, Mars and Venus, still involved. So right out of the gate, the Sun opposes Pluto at the North Bending. Another layer of wherever the nodes are. The nodes are in an exact polarity by degree, but the bendings of the nodes, you have a North Bending and a South Bending, whenever things hit that exact degree that's squaring the lunar nodes, you get an activation of the nodal and eclipse story. And that's what I am interested in here. On 22 July, a mere 5 days after this new moon that we have in Cancer, the Sun in Cancer is at the North Bending, exactly squaring the lunar nodes and exactly opposite Pluto by degree. What is Pluto? Deep transformations of the deepest structures of reality. And it's more of like the profound depths of everything. Saturn is structure, but Pluto is like the deepest. And so you get that energy injected into the new nodal axis with the solar consciousness planet. I think we're out of the gate ready to feel way more deeply into the eclipse story of that outer window of dates I talked about at the beginning than the 20 April solar eclipse in Aries. Now you get this right out of the gates, right after they change signs and they come into cardinal signs, the lunar nodes. Pay attention, because your eclipse story could build an intensity here and show itself in deeper ways about what these cardinal eclipses mean for you. Remember, Pluto is deep truths that become profoundly relevant. So there might be something small that maybe you haven't seen yet, and then boom, this moment here, 22 July, 7:14 UTC, and you're now into your whole cardinal eclipse story. And it could harken back, I'm going to say this here, I don't have a slide on this, but it could harken back to 2019 and 2020. The last time the lunar nodes were in cardinal signs. We may be revisiting some of those major shifts, those last years before COVID, and then we were brought into COVID by that eclipse cycle, like I talked about in the introduction, and now we get cardinal eclipses again with Pluto and Capricorn for this time, where it was during the COVID crisis and the emergence of all of that massive change in our reality. So keep that in mind. It's another way to map eclipse cycles. When were they in the same mode? And that happens about every 4.5 years. They come to the same mode. So you're on these 4.5 year check-ins. And remember, angularity, it exports to the crux of the chart. So this is why I'm very interested in that time as well. Okay, and I want to revisit this tweet from December, where I said 4 eclipses in 2023 in 4 different signs. Spring brings Mars-ruled eclipses. Those were the solar eclipse in Aries and then lunar eclipse in Scorpio. But fall brings the Venus-ruled eclipses, the Libra solar eclipse and the Taurus lunar eclipse. The final Taurus lunar eclipse, and it's the final Taurus eclipse and the final eclipse on the Scorpio-Taurus axis. So we're closing out that cycle, just as the new cycle is brought in, because this is the final piece of the first eclipse in Libra. That's one way to think about 2023. It's the transition between 2 eclipse cycles. 4 whole sign houses then will receive the joys of the eclipse alteration. I think I have this here just to remind us that, one, the first eclipse in Libra is this fall, that this fall maybe is Venus oriented. I think that's why I have it here. I've talked so much about that already, I'm just going to move. So I will say Venus in Virgo for both of those eclipses in October, where Mars is now, we've kicked up this Virgo thing that doesn't leave and that governs these eclipses. So look where Virgo is right now. What's going on there? Mars is going to leave. Venus will come. Mercury has a full retrograde in Virgo. It's all opposite Saturn. I talked about this in my Mars and Virgo video, but we're into the Virgo story that's a major component of this first eclipse season with the nodes in the new axis and the first eclipse in Libra. So check that out. Where's your whole sign house? Let's say you are a Gemini rising. You've got Virgo ruling your 10th. And you might have some major career change all throughout this eclipse season, and that you're up, that's getting kicked up now. Mars opposite Saturn, right in your 10th house. Maybe there's some work drama or tension, or it's overwhelming. Then Venus and Mercury will come. By the time you get to November 8th, when Venus will have worked through Virgo and those eclipses are over, you look for that to have settled your Virgo sector. But I just want, maybe that's what I was wanting to do here. Venus is in Virgo, ruling both these fall eclipses. I'll be talking way more about it. I'm shifting now into some more conversations here, and we're going to shift into some of the mundane, because I think that previous part of this talk, I got it into a lot of maybe the interpersonal dynamics, or the dynamics for the self astrology. But let's shift now to the outer world, the mundane part of it. True nodes enter Libra Aries. The last time this happened, so it was 1968. I don't have this up here, but this was the last time before the 80s when you had the nodes here on their 18-year cycle. The year 1968, everybody knows out there, was an election year, was a Venus star point that matches next year. And that was one of the most crazy election cycles in American history, with a lot of violence that marred that cycle. And I'm gonna speak about this, and I have alluded to it some, but I'm gonna do more mundane videos in August as I prepare for the SkyScript Mundane Conference that I'm speaking at. This is one of the major points, is that we have resonances to 1968, that crazy election cycle, and the eclipse nodal cycle is matching it. But then you have 86 April to December 87. This is just the dates of the lunar nodes in the same axis. It's not a full analysis of the whole window of the cycle of eclipses that come with the lunar nodes travels. You have December 2004 to June 2006. December 2004, you should remember, everybody, what happened right on December 2004. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you had a major earthquake in Indonesia that was, I think, the worst natural disaster in my lifetime. That you had a tsunami that flooded Thailand, that flooded India, and it killed many, 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 many people. That happened right on the ingress. I believe it was Christmas, right? So it was right at the day of the ingress. God forbid any kind of major natural disaster repeats here when we get closer to the ingress 1617. But it's on my radar, it's on my radar. So December 2004 to June 2006, and then you have July 2023 to January 2025. That's the one we're about to enter. Okay, themes. Fated changes in human connectivity and relating triggered by the lunar nodes. We've covered that at length. It's Mars, Venus, two planets of relationship, different styles of relationship. They rule the lunar nodes. Changes in warfare, that's Aries, ruled by Mars, planet of war, and an active outer posture. And our understandings collectively of war, that could be Libra. Like Libra is peace and war. Venus and Mars are war planets, but Libra is the kind of agreement side, the concordant side. I think this may relate to even new alliances, new types of alliances that will be necessitated because of the current war that's ongoing. If that continues, I mean, what does it look like in this post-war world that we're living through now? And then after, when the post-war world comes, what does it look like there? And now I'm just gonna go chronological. Let's start with the 80s. I mentioned briefly the 60s. I don't have a slide for that, but I had to mention it. That's why I mentioned it there. But the 80s themes, these are things that happened in the 80s when you had the lunar nodes in the same place that they're in. The Chernobyl disaster happens. This was crazy because we have these questions in Ukraine currently, the Zaporizhia power plant, and they're talking about a new Chernobyl disaster right there in southeastern Ukraine. So we're already seeing those resonances. Gosh, I hope that something similar doesn't happen, but we have to be aware. This is why we do mundane astrology. We like to see what the cycles brought before and then look at our reality and see where there's resonances, because it might key us in that those resonances are more important. We need to pay attention. So you had the Chernobyl disaster, you had the Hands Across America. This is the one I thought was quite interesting. May 25th, 1986. Hands Across America, everybody's holding hands, and they went, I guess, all the way across the contiguous United States, but this is the outer world relational. It's a perfect example of how the Libra Aries axis is, who do we want to be partners with in the outer world, and let's join and love. And it's this kind of faded expression of the human connectivity that's so important, I think, with that Libra focus. And then you had Iran-Contra. That affair peaked during this, the hearings and the investigation. That might be the North Node in Aries, eclipsing some of the warfare, bringing it to light, the nodes kind of showing us truth. And for these guys, there was an eclipsing that happened. They thought they could get away with it, and no, they were investigated and all of it. So I'm looking for resonances along those lines, potentially. I mean, we know that we have warfare going on, and the war industry is big, and the government relationship to that industry, and now what will happen here until 2025 early. So here's more 1980s themes. Black Monday happened with the node in Aries, the North Node in Aries. This was a major crash of the stock market after it had rallied, and then it just fell through the roof. I think it was 20% in one day, something insane. It got bought right back up, and the rallies continued. but you can look for something like that. I think my read here is that, remember, the cardinal axis is one of initiation. A lot of times when things come to the cardinal axis, new things emerge in the reality, like eclipses in Cancer, Capricorn, COVID, totally new shift for all of us, unprecedented changes that were initiated. And I think when you have the cardinal axis activated, there can be major events that take place. So the last few years with the nodes immutable and fixed were more about processing all of the new things that happened in 2020, like we were living through the management and processing of that. So, maybe there's going to be some new market event that initiates here, and then tear down this wall. The speech that Reagan gave at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, famous speech, and you can see already the beginnings of the changes around the global architecture, where this was now the kind of last days of the Soviet Union, and this eclipse cycle brought that into reality in a certain sense. Though it was later when Saturn enters Capricorn that everything really, and literally the Berlin Wall collapses with Saturn in Capricorn, Jupiter in Cancer. But those two great planets enter the cardinal axis right after the eclipses were there, and it was still that cardinal initiation where whole new structures emerge. Just like Saturn was in Capricorn, Aquarius, when COVID happened, it was these new structures of reality, a lot of online-based and new global orders to manage the crisis, etc. Shifting now to the aughts. What are the themes in the aughts? Well, the main thing that I see that's nodal in the aughts that emerges when the North Node was in Aries is the arrival of social media as we know it. The two platforms I'm only on these two platforms, by the way. You can find me on YouTube, regularly upload, and Twitter. I'm all over Twitter all the time. These platforms are invented and come online and are founded during this nodal transit. And I find it so resonant with the discovery of dwarf planet Eris. Eris is as important as Pluto. If you think Pluto is important and you're using that in your astrology and you're not using Eris, just consider, let me suggest kindly, that you ask yourself why and kind of try to justify it, because Eris is bigger than Pluto by some estimations, but they're basically the same size. Eris is a dwarf planet in the same part of the solar system. And if you're letting Pluto in, then you got to let Eris in, is how I view it. If you want Pluto to rule a sign, you're going to have Eris rule a sign. They're partners. But Eris, the dwarf planet of discord, comes on the scene at the same time that social media as we know it arrives. And we know how disruptive social media has been, the discordant nature of it. All of reality changes. Information, the way people get information is altered. The way people have relationships and take in media and all of it. This discordant feature of social media arrives with dwarf planet Eris emerging. And so we're returning to that. It's the first nodal return of Eris's discovery. I do hope that more Eris astrologers emerge and the elegant dance between Eris and Pluto can be examined. They were squaring each other, a rare Eris-Pluto square during 2020 when COVID emerges. That's a huge part of the COVID story in my view, if we're going to do dwarf planet astrology. And I was just seeing my friend Dan Waits, someone was tweeting that they were inspired by his work of moving Pluto through the Egyptian terms, and they were going to do it with Eris. This is all the kind of work we need to do to, I think, bring the current discoveries into this fusion and synthesis of tradition. But that's part of this cycle. Maybe this nodal transit that we're about to live through will bring more of that into being. And of course, changes around YouTube and Twitter, changes around social media. It's the nodal return, the first one of all of those platforms. During Taurus Scorpio eclipses, it was the founding of Facebook. And now we get YouTube and Twitter that followed the founding of Facebook. And so these whole relational eclipse-ruled transits are all about how, last time they happened, were about social media transforming our relationships. First nodal return of that now, and they might have deeper shifts and changes. We've seen that new platform by Zuckerberg, Threads. I'm not on it. I left Instagram because of impersonators. I'm just not in the Zuckerverse. I just don't have the energy for it to get back in it. But it's an example, though, of how the nodal return and you're getting new platforms, Musk's purchase of Twitter, and how that will be changed now. Maybe YouTube will have more changes soon. I'm not sure, but look for that. Look for that. Huge part of this nodal story in terms of the mundane. Another big player with the aughts themes, the Human Genome Project was completed and announced when the North Node came to Aries and the South Node was in Libra. Again, cardinal axis stuff, where it's like this is a whole new thing. They've launched now the architecture for all of the biotech and the new, biotech, medical industry, whatever that is, this was the key linchpin for that. And it's something deeply fundamental about reality. Like I said, the cardinal axis can be so profoundly fundamental. You have it with that example I gave in the introduction when the eclipses come to Cancer Capricorn, but you see it here. You see it with the social media launch that we just looked at. I think we're going to look for some more fundamental stuff relating to genes, gene therapies, all of the movement towards gene therapies in our reality. And I'm not saying I support it. I think we have to be very careful, and but it does have some promise. I'm sure there's going to be some cool stuff that happens, let's hope, with using these technologies and getting to some kind of fundamental thing, a cardinal axis type of turn that can build on this. Okay, and I guess I did have a slide here. I think I put this in at the end. This was a tweet that I had earlier this year. The Think 1960s cycle that was marred by violence and also had the North Node in Aries like 2024 will. This was replying to someone's tweet. And this was a news article from history.com. Was 1968 America's bloodiest year in politics? And that is Aries, right? Mars, it's the fire sign. Mars is blood. And I hope none of this repeats. I'm just telling you that right now, but you have to lay it out. Because what if next year's crazy? I mean, we know there's an election. We know it's charged. Everybody's on edge, always during election seasons. They're always crazy. And this resonance with 68 has me quite nervous about it. And I'm just praying for peace, trying to add value and trying to kind of settle here and not take the bait, as it were, and get violent. But sometimes that stuff's just inevitable. It's a collective urge. These aren't individuals that are making choices. These are kind of collective moves. And, it's just part of our life. And so look for some of that potentially next year. So just coming back to Dr. Hand, horoscope symbols, when he talks about the crosses or quadruplicities, the modes, that's why I say the crux of the chart. It's a cross. Your angular houses are comprised of a mode. And if your rising sign is in one of those modes, that mode becomes the crux or cross of your angular houses, the crux of your chart. So I like to see that he uses crosses here. What does he say about cardinal energy? It symbolizes initial creation, the impetus to create, and the making of beginnings. So just what I was saying earlier, I've seen the nodes hit cardinal axis or major outer planets, and boom, we're into some way creative energy and new things emerge in the reality. So Hand, I love how he articulates that as well. All right, that's it. That was I guess shortish or longish. I'm not sure how long this is going to eventually be, but a breakdown here of the nodes in Libra, in Aries, North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra, that starts on 17 July, 1.5 hours after the new moon in Cancer. I hope this video can help you think about the cycles in your life, plan, energetically prepare. There might be something you resonate with. This just helps as the fated changes shift into a new part of our charts in our lives. So my hope is that this can just add to your preparation process. And you can always go to sjanderson144.com, schedule an astrology reading, click on it right at the top, check out where the planets are. I've got this cool graphic that I made. I think it's cool. And other than that, have a lovely ingress, this intense month of astrology. I hope you're doing well, and just hang in there and write it out. It's all going to shift. That's the one beautiful thing about astrology. Things are always changing. So take care. Talk soon. Peace. Bye-bye.